afternoon. Greetings and salutations, everyone, and welcome to Incura's 2022 webinar series on diversity, equity, and inclusion. As Natasha mentioned, I am Natasha Williams. I will be your facilitator for today's webinar on managing and leading a culturally diverse workforce. Joining me today are our esteemed guests, Olive Giovannetti, I apologize for butchering your last name, who is a grants manager and grants and contracts officer at the University of California, San Francisco. We also have with us this afternoon Rick Roberts, who is the Director of Administration and Finance in the Department of Neurobiology and Neuroscience Institute at the Morehouse School of Medicine, as well as Shawna Lewis, who is the Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer in the Office of Equity and Board Initiatives, County of Los Angeles Child Support Services. For today's program, we have three objectives. We will be discussing today, number one, growing a DEI culture. Number two, the psychological conditions of personal engagement and disengagement at work. And number three, we hope to leave you with some practical tools for you and for your organization. And with that being said, let's get started. And I will pass the baton to Olive, who will lead off today's session.
Hi, everyone. I'm Olive Giovannetti, and I am the proud manager and leader of Team Extremely Fabulous at the University of California, San Francisco's Office of Sponsored Research. These are just 16 of my 21 of us. I have 20 teammates. And as you can kind of see from this photo, we run the gamut of diversity. We have folks from various ages and generations, races, gender identities, religions, non-religions, political beliefs, sexual orientations, and so on. And we are a tight-knit team with a lot of respect for one another and do what we can to support one another and help each other shine. Next slide. So I wanted to start this off with a poll just to get a sense of how many people do you lead. And when I asked how many people do you lead, if you have a team of 2 or 3 people, that's pretty obvious, right? But if you're a director or a vice chancellor or something, you may lead 120 people, but you may have 5 direct reports. So I wanted to get an idea of how many people you lead overall. And so if you supervise or lead 1 or 2 people, there may not be a lot of room for a lot of diversity on your team, right? You don't have as many people, but this is also an important topic because we want to look at the equity and inclusion of the people that you have on your team. Do they feel they belong? Are they welcomed, right? And then if you have 120 people that you lead and you have perhaps 4 direct reports, who are you hiring into those 4 positions, right? Do they have diversity, equity, and inclusion as a value that they work to lead? Okay, awesome. Okay, so a lot of you with small teams, and then some of you with 4 to 10. All right, thank you. And then a second poll, and I swear this is the last one for me today. And then, does your institution advocate for DEI values? Do they not talk about DEI? That's not really even something that's mentioned. Do they talk about values, but that's about it, not really much action? Do they walk the DEI walk? And when I say that, I don't necessarily mean that you walk on where you're perfect, right? But do you do your best to walk the walk? Or there's a 4th option of, I'm not sure, kind of, which is they kind of talk about it, they kind of mention it every now and again. Okay, so a number of institutions, the highest number talk about DEI values, okay, but maybe not necessarily walk it. So that's good to know that there's the conversation, but maybe people are unsure of what actions to take. So you're in the right webinar for that. And then a lot of institutions that walk the DEI walk, that's awesome. And then some that the institution does not talk about DEI or sort of. And really welcome to this webinar. We're really glad that you're here to hear more about this topic. Okay. And so what is the perception of your institution to potential candidates, right? Is your institution somewhere that people feel drawn to apply to, right? Do they feel like they could be welcomed? If people do a Google search, what will they find about your institution? I realize as leaders, we may not be able to single-handedly shift the perception of our institution's value of DEI, but what can we do individually to build a stronger DEI culture at our institution? And sometimes it's just starting where we're at within our own team or department. I went to an Incura AM meeting a number of years ago, and Mae Jemison was one of the speakers, and she said, "What will you do with your place at the table?" And I love that quote so much. And she may have quoted someone else, but I love that so much I put it on a Post-it, because each one of us, no matter where we're sitting at the table, we can do something, right? And so what is your perception of DEI to all employees? Are there any groups of people within your institution who don't feel included or welcomed or safe or have a sense of belonging? If so, that's problematic, but it's a good start. At least you're aware of these employees' experiences, right? UCSF has a staff survey. We look at employee emotional needs as well as engagement, belonging, burnout. Do people have the equipment they need? Do they understand what their role is within the institution? And then it also asks people to identify their race, gender identity, sexual orientation, right? And so we can see who's feeling left out. What are we as an institution not doing correctly? What are we not doing? And then what is your institution doing to address these gaps? What are you as a team leader doing to address these gaps? Sometimes we can't necessarily change the culture, right? But are we going to leadership, or are we doing what we can within our own teams? At UCSF, we regularly hear from people joining the organization. Wow, UCSF does a lot. You guys are really, we're walking the DEI walk. And so that's good to hear, but we as an institution, we realize that we have more to go, right? That there are gaps there are people who are not as engaged, right? That are in our institution. And so we need to continually look at that and work on having everyone be engaged or feel engaged and belonging. And there are more areas of DEI focus, but even with all that, the chancellor stated during his most recent State of the University address that while we're making strides to be a diverse and equitable and inclusive place to work and learn, we have areas where we fall short and more work is to be done. Not just by leadership, but it takes all of us. Diversity is part of our pride values. So on our lanyards, pride is professionalism, respect, integrity, diversity, and excellence. These values are key in our culture and are part of our performance evaluations. So really supporting the belief that these values are up to each of us to make a better and more welcoming workplace. And then next slide. So when I share all that, that's UCSF, right? And I know everyone isn't somewhere where they have the walk the walk, right? But these are just some of the programs and some of the areas of focus that we look at as we try to improve, right? And so creating or maintaining a DEI culture. So I had a little chicken and egg at first on this, right? Because it's like, who are you hiring? And then what environment are you hiring them into, right? So if you don't already have a pretty inclusive team, then you could hire someone and it may not go well, right? And so we don't want to hire someone and have them have the brunt of not being welcomed or not feeling a sense of belonging, right? And so also looking at who we're hiring, do they bring openness as well to the position? And so when I'm interviewing candidates, I'm conscious of the gaps that we have in diversity on my team, and I hire the best candidate for the role. I don't hire based on, oh, like, let me check my boxes so I look good, right? I'm hiring everyone on my team is the best candidate, and they earned their spot on the team, right? And so so one thing I do is I have candidates go through a second round. So the first round, they sit with team managers, we ask them questions, and anyone who I'm considering hiring, I have them sit in on a second round interview. And that they meet with a diverse group of folks from my team, right? And then they're asked questions and they can ask questions and find out more about our team and our culture. And then after they come out of that second round interview, I meet with them and I'm trying to get a sense of, do they appreciate the team? Do they like the team? Do they want to be a part of this, right? And do they feel welcome? Do they feel supported, right? So I want to know both ways. And then I meet with the panelists who did the interviewing, and then I ask them if they think that the person, is a good fit as well. And I listened to, like, yeah, they seemed like a team player. And so, and also I'm looking to see if the candidate is not really interested in the team. That's, for me, very concerning. I am foremost about the team. And then also one time we were interviewing candidates and it came to my attention that a candidate had posted several times hateful messages online. And so with that, we could not move forward. I let the contracting agency know about the candidate and what we found. And I let them know it's not UCSF's pride values to move forward with this person, but also I, as a manager, a leader, I cannot have someone on my team who is not for everyone on the team. Even if it was no one on the team, it doesn't matter. I need someone who comes in and is like, all right, let's do this, right? And so equity inclusion also means honoring people's values. Perhaps their cultural or religious traditions may need to leave may mean they need to leave early some days. And so just maybe checking in or observe or celebrate a religious holiday. If you know someone on your team observes or celebrates holy days that aren't federal holidays, you might want to check in and see, check on their workload, see if they need to leave early, if they're going to be able to, right? Because sometimes things come up, a last minute thing. Is there something you can take off their plate so that they can get home in time to acknowledge or celebrate the holiday? And I want to note that there's various ways to lead DEI creation and growth. So you could check out the various tools and options. And so Rick and Shawna are going to share some of those and see what's a good fit for your team. What works for one group of folks may not work for another, right? So if you're in the beginning of stages of creating a DEI culture, you may want to find a DEI mentor or others who are like-minded and hear what they did to create and grow DEI in their department or institution. And like I said, what works for one group may not work well for another group. So some teams may like a team-based unconscious bias training where they can learn, discuss, and share together. And some teams may not be open to that and would sit in silence because maybe they don't feel safe, maybe there's various things. Maybe they don't feel safe, right? So there's an online unconscious bias trainings or learning about microaggressions, and you could assign that training to folks and they could do it individually. And then in your next one-on-one, you can ask questions, right? What was their takeaway? What did they learn? What did they think of the training? And having a team like Team EF, I find that respect is key. Sometimes we make mistakes. Sometimes we say things, we step on someone's toes. We're quick to acknowledge. We stop right where we're at and acknowledge. Sometimes we just move on, and other times, there's an apology. And so we want a safe space and listen to each other. And then on to the next.
So if I could just jump in for a minute, we have a couple of questions. And so the first one I think that we want to ask is, how do you ensure that your interviewers have an unbiased lens?
That's a good question. So that is a really good question. I pick people who, well, one, I have multiple people, right? So I'm trying to hear from multiple people their take on candidates. And then we've had in the past at the for General Hospital, we had annual DEI trainings. And so, but that does bring to light that sharing an unconscious bias training with everyone, have them take that before interviewing people may be a good thing for me to add to what I'm already doing. And I wanted to share that at the beginning. I'm not perfect at this. I'm passionate about it, but I'm in no means perfect or I'm doing it all right. And so I'm kind of excited to be here to also see some of my blind spots. And was there another question, Natasha?
Yeah. So there are two more questions, but let's go ahead and get through these last two slides, and then I'll ask those two questions.
Okay, cool.
How's that?
And then if you'll go up one slide, please. Okay, thanks. And so leading a DEI team means having so self-awareness and so unconscious biases, right? Even realizing that that's a thing that you do have, not could have, do have, right? And learning a little bit more about what that is and what you're comfortable and uncomfortable with, and pushing yourself beyond your uncomfortability, right? Curiosity, so cultural humility and openness. So cultural humility, I think, sometimes has a bad rap, where people can, consider humility and humiliation. Well, it's not about that. It's about knowing that that I have a lived experience, right? I'm a white female. I grew up in the Midwest, and I've lived in San Francisco since 1991, and I spent 4.5 years of my life living on the streets, right? So some of these things, you see me, it's readily apparent, right? And then other things you might not know until I say y'all, and then you're like, huh, okay, she's not from San Francisco. And so that's for everyone, right? That everyone has lived experiences that don't match mine, and then being open to that, right? And excited to learn about at what everybody's got going on that they're comfortable sharing. And then courage is it's not always easy. Sometimes you're going to mess up, like I said. It's just part of being human. And then just knowing, like, okay, I need to make a personal amends or an apology at a group level. What was my takeaway from that, right? And then to not beat myself up, and to learn from it and move on. Vulnerability, we need to be vulnerable so others can potentially feel it's safe for them to be vulnerable too. Empathy, having active listening skills, letting people be who they are, and offering support, sometimes direct, sometimes letting them know there's resources available to them, and then appreciating what others are going through. And then gratitude, that DEI is in your consciousness, and that you as a leader and individual have some amount of power to improve the lives of those you spend about 1/3 of your work week with, and that you can make a difference in people feeling welcome, safe, and a sense of belonging. Next. And then these are just some of the resources at UCSF for DEI. These are just some of them. There's like so many more. It's like a rabbit hole, but I just wanted to share these in case you don't have, I know everyone has Google, right? But in case you don't have resources at your own institution, checking them out, anyone's welcome to come to our COVID-19 town halls. They're every other Friday at 4 p.m. Pacific time. All right, Natasha, do you have questions?
I do have questions. So the next question, and I think that this is a really good question, is does your team go through DEI related interview training that they engage in before conducting interviews with job candidates?
No, not at this time, but I think that is a great idea, and I'm actually going to bring that into our process. So I'm on the Encura Education Scholarship Fund, and we did that when we started with redacted applications for candidates, and so I think it was brilliant. It was helpful to see, to bring to light unconscious biases, and so yes, I'm going to bring that on.
Okay, and one other question that we have was going back to the comment that you made about social media and looking at candidates' social media. The question that came in is, are you monitoring candidates' social media as part of your hiring process?
I don't. That one just came to my attention, but no, I don't typically go on. I don't Google people beforehand, though I guess that one can be touchy or tricky, right? So, I mean, to see if I don't know how that person would have interviewed, right? I don't know that their views would have come to light during the interview process. but then I'm also hesitant to, you know, what am I looking for, right? What am I trying to find? If it's
Mhm.
hate speech, that's one thing. If I'm like, oh, I don't know, what is this person's lifestyle like? Oh, they look like a partier. I don't want to interview them. You know, I'd want to veer away from that. So I think I'm trying to be safer than, more cautious than
Mhm.
looking into
And
people's.
well, thank you so much for that, Olive. That was very instructive, and we appreciate you leading us through ways that we can grow our DEI culture. And so now we will turn to Rick, and we will ask Rick if he will lead us through some psychological conditions of personal engagement and disengagement at work. I'm
Great.
sure he has lots to share.
Well, I have a little bit to share anyway. So thank you so much. I'm Rick Roberts from Morehouse School of Medicine in Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Thank you for this opportunity. I put this slide in our slide deck to really just indicate the current workforce of the United States of America. It's very diverse. It's very multi-generational, very, very ethnic in its appeal. This is according to the Pew Research Center. Roughly, the current workforce is made up of 77% Caucasian or white, 18% Hispanic and Latino, 13% African American or Black, and maybe 6%, roughly 6% Asian. And so this is a good depiction of what the current workforce looks like. It's multi-generational, multi-ethnic. Next slide, please. I put this slide in the slide deck because I wanted you to see that not only this multi-generational component of the workforce, but the workforce also is largely comprised of millennials and G generation, the Z generation, which has great implications because that means most of our workforce is made up of younger, techno-savvy, innovative, younger adults in the workplace. In higher ed, as you, I'm sure, are fully aware, that I have faculty that I work with that are in the silent generation in the 80s. I have a few a little bit older than 80. I have a few in the 75s. And so this picture, again, from the Pew Research Center is a great example of what the workforce comprised of. And I'm so glad that Olive started her presentation out with a picture of her staff and her unit because it is a depiction of what the workforce is today. Next slide, please. One of the things that has arisen in the profession, or in just not just in higher ed, but in corporate America as well, is this idea that it is challenging, or it has been challenging to root out or to embrace diversity and inclusion and equity across biases of conscious and unconscious biases. This article here is an article that was written in 2015. It's a report on Google, the organization, where they identify some of the challenges that they have with diversity, equity, and inclusion. And basically what the gist of the article suggests is that out of the 56,000 employees that Google has, 70% of them were male, 30% were women, obviously, so that's the gender breakout, which is really 2 to 1. And then you have ethnicities, but of that 56,000 population, only 3% was Latino or Hispanic, 2% was African American. And so only 3 of the 36 executives, which is really about 8%, were executives or women who were in executive leadership positions. And so it really pointed out that the challenge and struggle, just really not that many years ago, that, you know, a name brand organization and company that we all interface with on a daily basis has struggles in this area. Also, when Google was confronted with these, when the numbers came out, their response was, you know, these were unconscious biases. And so they implemented workshops and training sessions to try to bolster or to dismiss the prejudices or the blind spots in their organization. But at the time of this article that was printed, like I said, in 2015, only 2,000 of the 56,000 employees participated in the workshops, and only half of the employees actually watched the 90-minute video on diversity, equity, and inclusion. Next slide, please. And so, you know, we heard previously the conversation about these terms of diversity and inclusion and all of that, but these are some terms that I think are really important to kind of get your hands around in terms of when you talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. And one is unconscious bias, also implicit bias. And it's a behavior or action that you perform unconsciously. You just simply are not aware of the bias that you have. And that is so important because you could have biases and just simply, you're just unaware. As in the Google indicated their unconscious biases was the basis for their numbers. Unconscious biases are a fact of life. Everyone harbors unconscious biases. As a matter of fact, research indicates that there's probably around 150, if not more, unconscious biases that people exist that have been identified. Unconscious biases in the workplace could be they stymie diversity, they hurt recruitment, retention efforts suffer. Unknowingly, we shape the organizational culture because of our biases, and and then unconscious bias also skews the talent, as Olive was indicating in the recruiting. It skews the talent when you look at the picture of your workforce and it doesn't have a lot of diversity in it. It can skew the talent. It affects who gets hired and who doesn't get hired. Unconscious biases are prejudices that we have but we're unaware of, and there are mental shortcuts that we take from norms in society or stereotypes or some of the things we see on television. Biases can be color, it can be skin, your skin color, your gender, your age, it can be height. I'm in Atlanta, so hair is obviously can be a bias. You can be an introvert, extrovert. It can be if you're married, there's biases, you prefer, it may suggest to you that if a person or individual is married, that they're more stable versus a single individual. It could be if you see someone disabled who comes into the interview with a cane or has a speech impediment. These things are biases that we hold that we don't really consciously know about, but they do factor into the decision-making process at times. Unconscious biases have no idea they are. People who have unconscious biases have no idea that they're doing these things, and it's really tragic because it can hurt an organization significantly. And if you go back and you look at a lot of the photos for corporations or for institutions, it's amazing the lack of diversity that you see in the photoshops. And then when you do see diversity, and I hate to say it, sometimes the person, the man or woman, is so light that you can't even tell if they are another nationality or ethnic group. So it's really a reality. A couple of more terms. Conscious biases are you are aware of the decisions that you're making and you're intentionally doing those things. And a cognitive biases is deeply rooted family, culture, values, and religious affiliations that you bring into the workplace. It's just it's who you are, the DNA of who you are. And so because these biases are so predominant in all of us, and we all come from different fabrics of society, all different cultures, all different walks of life, rural, urban, and all of those kinds of things, it made me think about how do you approach diversity and equity and inclusion. And so I want to give you an idea. Next slide. I'll give you a couple ideas, rather. My thoughts on this are one of the best ways, I think, to approach diversity, equity, and inclusion. The first one is have a professional work environment. throughout my career, I have noted that actually I was interviewing a woman and she said, Rick, if it's not professional, I'm not really sure what it is. And that has stuck with me across the years. That you in the corporate world, it was core values. These are the core values with which we hold, of which we govern our organization. I think in higher ed as well, we need to establish as a core value professionalism. And what I mean by that is business-like behavior, etiquette, and appearance in the workplace as the currency through which we establish as the basis for which how we communicate with one another who come from all different walks of life. I used to be an athlete, and so one of the things I thought about during this presentation is that we really never talked about diversity, equity, and inclusion on the football field or on the basketball court or on the track. What we talked about is, did you have the skills, the ability, and the talent to do the job that we needed to do so to help us be successful? And I think that that common denominator on the athletic arena is you want to win. It's the same kind of mentality that we should have in the workplace. It's professionalism. And I push that. Now, I put on here, professionalism starts with the organizational leadership. And I've written something on this previously, but my definition of organizational culture is the beliefs, the values, the traits, the behaviors of senior leadership, because they flow down through the organization and they are dominant. Now, even though your organization, your office may have subcultures and sub-beliefs, it's those beliefs of the senior leadership that have to demonstrate their behaviors. And if they model professionalism, I believe that it will trickle down through the organization. The second thing I think is important, our approach to diversity, equity, and inclusion, is employee engagement. Now, using employee engagement as kind of like a gauge or a litmus test to help you identify where potential diversity, equity, and inclusion issues may occur. And so I raise the question to you, are your employees actively engaged in work? Now, this is a big problem in corporate America. We struggle with it, or it's been struggled with across the years. Just employees are not engaged. Click to the next slide, please. The next slide, this gentleman here is William Kahn. And Kahn is pictured, he's a Boston University Business School professor. And he wrote an article in 1990 where he coined the term employee engagement. And in his research, his article is called The Psychological Conditions of Personal Engagement and Disengagement at Work, which is what I entitled this presentation because I knew I was going to use a piece of his article. But in his article, he described there's three types of employees in the workplace. And essentially what he says, you're either engaged, you're passionately doing your job, or you're not engaged. And those are sleepwalkers. Those are people who just show up and they're really not engaged in the work. We've had, I've seen some of those. I'm not going to put any age range, but I've seen some of those from my time. And then we've had actively disengaged, and those are people who are just, they hate the job, they can't find another job, and so they're just frustrated, and so they're actively engaged. This idea is a big problem in corporate America, and it's obviously a big problem in higher ed, where we struggle sometimes with engagement, disengagement in our workplace. The reason I'm using this is again, I'm using it as a possible link to help you identify where you could potentially have diversity, inclusion, and equity issues. Next slide, please. One of the things that came out as Kahn's research, which is really where I'm tagging this, is he ultimately believed that employee engagement was a problem, less about did the person fit. I was just at a conference, and the lady, she indicated as she was doing her presentation that by the time it gets up to her, she's looking solely at fit. But Kahn says, it's not so much about fit or lack of pay. It's about fundamentally about how the person felt or how they feel about the organization. And that's why what Olive said earlier is so important, that do you feel like you want to be a part of the team? Do you feel like these are individuals that you would be interested in working with, or working for, or being colleagues or shoulders to shoulder with in the work environment? This slide depicts the main components of Khan's emotional grid, and he has three. And you'll see where I'm kind of connecting this. The first thing Khan says or suggests is that work needs to be meaningful. Are we giving people, regardless of ethnic group, regardless of gender identity, regardless of sexual orientation, are we giving them meaningful jobs? That's the first question. The second thing is, if you give people, or what he suggests, if you give people meaningful work, then the second thing you want to look for are people, are they available to work? And what he meant by this idea is that people, I don't know if it's happened just in the years that I've been working, but people don't necessarily come to work to work. They come to work to socialize, they come to work to hang out, they come to work to get away from home, but do you come to work to work? And what Khan is suggesting is that you need to be psychologically available to work. You don't need to be thinking about taking care of caregivers. You don't need to be thinking about your kids, your dog, your bills, your marriage, your relationships. You need to be thinking about, are you focused in on work? And I think about this, what we used to say in the athletic world is your head in the game? You know, you can have the physical ability to do the job, but is your head in the game? But the point that I want to stress, that Khan's key component that I believe aligns itself very well with DEI, is this idea of safety. And what he points out here is, do your employees feel safe to express themselves freely in the workplace? And if they don't, then there's going to be probably some disengagement, and there's probably going to be a loss of work production. There's probably going to be some isolation, some loneliness, those kinds of ideas. And so I think that's a real good pin for us to compare, our parallel, our gauge, really what's going on in our work environments, just by the activity or the engagement of our employees. Next slide, please. This slide here, I wanted to give you, since Google listed that their challenges in their workplace were primarily identified with unconscious biases, I wanted to give you some steps to think about or consider for, to help you with your unconscious biases. And I think the first one is so relevant, that you recognize that we all have biases. We all have biases. And I'll pause here and I'm gonna say a little story. I was working for an organization and they had a softball team. And so they asked me to play. And so I went out and played, and then it was co-ed, and I ended up pitching. And so when I'm pitching the softball, I started making a distinction between when the women batters or the female batters came up versus the male batters. And I was really unconscious of what I was doing, but the opposing team made me fully aware of it when I came up, because they'll say male batter, male batter, male batter, which was an indication that you needed to back up in the outfield, or female batter, you need to pull up. And that was something that I was just totally unaware of, and was doing it in a, at a sports venue connected to my job. And so one of the, or really the CEO of the organization and my boss pulled me to the side and said, "Hey, Rick, let's cut the female batter piece, because obviously the other team didn't like it." And it was just something that I never thought of. You have to identify and recognize that you do have biases. The second thing is, identify what those biases are. And then you have to dissect, think about, this is what I call the litmus test of being honest with yourself, or self-awareness. Or how truthful, are you to you? You can lie to me, you can lie to the organization, but can you look yourself in the mirror and be totally honest with yourself. I blew it. I hit it out of the park. I did a great job. I say that is the litmus test, because whether, you'll get employee evaluations, some will be praise, some will be negative, but you have to be able to say to yourself, I did do a great job. And that helps balance it out. The fourth is develop a strategy to address it. Once you identify what your biases are, how are you going to address them? You need to develop a strategy. And so fifth is you find some common support groups. If there are organizations out there, if you have biases against a certain ethnic group or a certain gender, there's support groups that you can probably join that will help you be more sensitive and to be more familiar and see the world from a different worldview. Like I said, not all of us walk in the same shoes. And so it's very important to see that. And then work to get rid of your biases. And what I said, number 7, is you have to be mindful that because a lot of these biases have developed from our worldview, they're going to be very difficult to get rid of and very challenging. And so you're going to have to work at it. And you may have to work at it over and over again. It doesn't mean that you're a failure. It just means that you have to work at it. Next slide, please. This final slide that I have in this presentation is really just some references that I wanted to give you. You can go through the references and see kind of where they are, but these are some really good references just to get you pointed in the direction of how to embrace or better understand or deal with diversity, equity, and inclusion, especially when you're managing and leading a culturally diverse workforce. Do you have any more questions?
Yes, Rick, thank you for that. There are a couple of questions. I will start with the easier of the two.
Okay.
Higher ed is notorious for hiring through conformity bias. How do we break this generational trend to extend more opportunities to a diverse population seeking careers in STEM fields and or in research administration?
That's a great question. I think about how they do it in the registrar's office. They intentionally say, when I was affiliated with Emory, we used to intentionally say that we're going to look for certain types of candidates and just not, if you hire the best and the brightest, if you don't extend your candidate pool, sometimes you lose out on those opportunities. Now that I'm at an HBCU, particularly with Morehouse School of Medicine, we definitely have to put out a broad net to get candidates to come into our institution, because we're, if you will say, reverse diversity. We are predominantly African American. And so we have to make sure that we extend our net out wide and broad so that we are inclusive of all candidates, and not just the few are the first ones that pop up on our radar. So that would be my response to that.
Okay, and so the other question is, often when we are talking about professionalism, we are talking about a set of behaviors that many would say centers European aesthetics and behaviors to the exclusion of the cultural norms and traditions of other groups of people. What are some things that we can do to ensure that when we are talking about professionalism, we are not unintentionally furthering the biases that we are trying to combat?
I appreciate that question. It's a great question. Let me approach it this way. When I talk about professionalism, I'm talking about you have to have a meeting ground in the workplace. And so let me give you an example. And I have this conversation with millennials all the time. Is that when the light turned red, you stop. When the light turned green, you go. When the light turned yellow, you slow down. Now, true, there's innovations. We do have roundabouts where stop signs are now, which is something a little different. But the reality of it is we have to have a meeting ground in the workplace. And yes, you can be fully, yourself and you can bring your full self into the workplace. I never want to diminish that. But I think we have to have standards, especially in higher ed, especially when you work with a student population that's multi-generational. As an example, you know, if we don't have standards, uh, just we could have flip-flops, we could have short shorts, we could have crop tops, we could have halter tops, we could have a number of things. And that doesn't diminish from professionalism, but what it does say is, you know, there's a body of communication that we all function at, and that we can't, I think, and this is a bias. It can't. I don't think we can. Um, it can be distracting to the workplace, and I think that's why we've always had codes of conduct, codes of dress, codes of you know, etiquette in the workplace. And I just think that in this casual khaki soft collar environment, we may have gotten away from it a little bit, and especially with Zoom, we may have gotten away from it. But it doesn't mean that we're trying to advocate. We're just trying to standardize how we communicate professionally in a work environment with one another.
Okay, great. Thank you, Rick. Thank you so much for that and for a very engaging section this afternoon. And so I think now we want to turn to Shawna, who is going to lead us through a discussion of some practical tools for organizations. Shawna,
Good,
you're up.
good afternoon. Thank you for that wonderful introduction. Kudos to Olive and Rick, my esteemed panel guests as well. I really enjoyed your presentations. I come to you from the great county of Los Angeles. I am a public servant, an equity practitioner, an HR professional, a culture architect, and I use she and her pronouns. Next slide, please. So moving forward, we heard about talking the talk, walking the walk, fully engaged employees. What does it feel like here? I love the fact that Rick talked about leadership behavior and attitudes dominate the culture in the workplace. And I love the way that both of you were able to answer the questions that came up very, very expertly and honestly and transparently. And that's what it takes. What we saw on display is that's what it's going to take for us in the workplace as we're managing and leading our culturally diverse teams, admitting we're not perfect, admitting we don't know it all, admitting these are biases, admitting that sometimes when people refer to professionalism, it can be viewed as whiteness because that's the truth, and acknowledging that. And so my goal in my area of our panel deck, our slide deck, is to look at what we can do. It is not fully exhaustive. It may work for your organization. It may not. But the goal is to stimulate your thinking, to give you some ideas, and to get the ball rolling, because you may be far along in your diversity journey, you may in mid-road or just getting started. But the important thing is that we all do something. And so I love this statement here. It says, in the past, jobs were about muscles in the industrial age, and now they're about brains. But in the future, they will be about the heart. And why do I say that? Because the last 2 years, we have been unpacking a lot of information surrounding DEI, work culture, cancel culture, and having bold and courageous conversations that are even difficult at times. And so we need some best practices that can help us move along. Cultural diversity, race, identity, gender, different abilities, neurodiversity, work styles, discrimination, equity, belonging, and love in the workplace. These are deeply emotional topics. And so kudos to everyone that registered and showed up, and to everyone that will watch our webinar in the future, because having these conversations and walking the walk takes bravery. We need people who are courageous to carry it out, because it's easy to put it on paper, but to actually implement these things can be very challenging, especially if you have a passion for DEI, but you may not have yet built the capacity to carry out effective DEI strategies. And so many people from underrepresented groups in the workplace, they feel the pressure to assimilate into the dominant workplace culture that Rick mentioned, and are reluctant to bring them their full selves to work. And we know that, again, organizations are only as good as their culture, And building the culture is not only the organization's top leadership, not only human resources, not only the managers, it's everyone's job. It's everyone's responsibility to build a supportive and engaging workplace. And we have to be intentional about seeking to understand what motivates our employees, what makes our employees feel good, how does it feel to be in this place. And it's going to cause us to have to challenge our biases, our conscious and unconscious biases. And we also, as leaders, have to understand that there are a lot of different diversities, even in underrepresented groups. These groups are not monoliths. And even just for disability's sake, you have significant diversity in the disability realm. You have cognitive disabilities, physical or mobility disabilities, sensory related disabilities. And so we can't just assume a one size all fits everyone. We have to meet our employees where they are. And so the tools that I'm going to share are just the starting point. They are not the ceiling. These are the floor for you, again, to begin exploring ways to effectively lead and manage a diverse workforce. Finally, we want to improve engagement, as Rick so expertly shared about, counteract biases, and foster an inclusive culture for all. And I want to talk about the talent life cycle. So my guest talked about recruitment, getting that diverse pool. We had a great question about what do we do to make sure that we have people trained and that they have diverse panels for interviews. We talked about those hiring practices, and we know that we need training, and some organizations need fundamental shifts going to redacting all information, maybe even blind interviews, take away the camera, take away the person, let's just hear their voice. Onboarding is such a special time because that's when our employees get to see what the culture of the organization is about, and they can see our ongoing commitment to diversity, equity, and inclusion, to foster that sense of belonging, and that is important to leadership, management, and operational staff. Again, we all have a job, we all have a role to play. And then we talk about, in the talent life cycle, retention. This is where we're exploring career and professional and development opportunities. And we want to build bridges and not barriers for greater collaboration and succession planning. Because one of the most challenging things to do is to have someone who has been with your organization for many, many years leave. And because they're not engaged, because there's a grudge, unspoken conflict, they don't pass the baton to the incoming. I'm not training that person. I don't want to be involved. They have the mindset that they've been mistreated, or they have the disengaged mindset. I'm gonna get my 8 and hit the gate. We don't want that. We want a successful baton pass on this race so that the organization can continue to thrive and build upon what they have with the sharing of knowledge and experiences. Next slide, please. So we're going to go into a poll. I want to know, in order to increase employee engagement, has your organization developed or implemented one of the following? Have you all implemented or explored the Diversity Council, book and media talks, lunch and learns, employee resource groups, or none of the above? And these, again, just some ideas to get you thinking, to get you exploring. These can help with issues in the workplace that we're dealing with. What are we dealing with in our workplaces? Communication barriers, stereotypes and prejudice, low trust or less trust from many times underrepresented groups, or even for people who are hearing all about DEI and they're seeing so many changes happening, they feel change is hard for all of us. They may feel fearful. There may be resistance. Maybe we have some productivity challenges. And so these tools that we have can help us overcome that resistance, continue to engage our employees, and continue to make sure our employees understand that they do belong within our workplace, and that they can bring their full selves into our workplaces, and that they don't have to hide who they are. Oh, wonderful. So we have a good group that has a diversity council. All right, we have some book and media talks and lunch and learns. Okay, some ERGs. All righty, and none of the above. So there's work to do. So it looks like we're in great company. Hopefully what we'll share today will be helpful for us as we move forward. And so dealing with the Diversity Council, is typically a group that provides representation from different backgrounds within the organization. They typically meet on a specific schedule or cadence to discuss what's being actioned in DEI, how it's working, providing advice on what to do next. The DEI leadership and the DEI think tank may be a part of the Diversity Council. And this is the group of people that can assess, do we need to do a culture reset? Again, like Olive said, not just ticking the box. And so they are gauging, giving us the pulse of the organization, boots on the ground. And these diversity councils, we want to make sure that they employees from every aspect of the organization are welcome, from the janitor all the way up to the chancellor, vice chancellor, depending on the organization, the president, the director. We want to give everybody an opportunity to participate and bring their thoughts to the table. Book and media talks. I use a more inclusive title instead of book club, because typically that has like a feminine connotation to it. And so we may miss our gentlemen or our other gender or non-binary colleagues that want to come. But these opportunities, these groups give us an opportunity to educate and connect stakeholders across our organization on diverse topics of their choosing, and finding points of similarity and differences with a goal to develop a deeper appreciation, and rejecting the idea of required assimilation. Lunch and learns. I love lunch and learns. We recently had one here where we did a cooking demonstration, and they can be peer lunch and learns. You can bring a subject matter expert in, talking about current events, cultural or heritage celebrations. Hey, here in LA County at Child Support, we celebrated National Hispanic Heritage Month, and they asked me to be the host. I said, I am an ally. I will gladly be the host. But if there is someone from your group that would like to host, that would have any issue with me as a host, I gladly defer and allow them to come. But I did show up as an ally. I learned so much during that event, and it was a wonderful opportunity. Employee resource groups. This is the special sauce over here in my organization, and maybe it is because I saw that was the greatest number that we had in our poll. These are voluntary, employee-led groups whose aim is to foster a diverse, inclusive workplace aligned with the organizational values and goals that they serve. Regardless of what direction your organization goes in, you want to make sure that you're engaging, meeting regularly, educating, providing literature, training, ebooks, guides, explaining the benefits and the procedure in simple terms. Make it easier. Get rid of the barriers. Make it easy for people to feel welcome. Again, we may have people from all aspects, all levels within our organization joining, so we don't want to make them feel excluded by our conversation or by the content. We want to empower them. What do I mean by that? Because DEI has been around for a long time. However, many of us, while organizations have been talking the talk, we haven't really had permission. We need leadership to come in and say, you have permission to encourage us and empower us to participate in these things, because many times people don't believe that I'm going to go and sign up for the Diversity Council, and then when it's performance evaluation time, they're going to pencil with me on my PE because they don't think that it's part of my regular job. But the reality of it is, the biggest investment in any agency, any organization, any place is going to be your people. When you look at your bottom line costs, payroll is at the top, which means your culture starts with your people, must engage your people, and must continue to involve your people to develop it, because they are the greatest asset. No goal, no objective is ever going to be above your workforce. That is your most valuable asset. And so when we take the time to intentionally invest in this area, our people feel seen, our people feel heard, our people feel valued, our people feel appreciated. And then we want to ask them, how is it going? Consider the situation. We got this started. Go back, engage, empower, encourage, educate. These are all the things that we want to keep in mind no matter what we choose to do. Next slide, please. And so what are the benefits of your organization or agency doing something? The benefits on the very basic level, again, the employees get to co-create the climate. I don't want someone to hand me. Yes, we have our policies, our procedures, our rules. That's part of our onboarding, and we absolutely have to make sure it's understood. But there are things that we can do. Do we have permission to have a cultural celebration? Do we have permission to have a holiday ensemble? Do we have permission to celebrate those holy or holiday celebrations? We want to make sure that our employees have an opportunity to co-create the climate, not just inherit one that's already there. Again, seen, felt, and heard. In your home, you want to be seen, felt, and heard. In your relationships, you want to be seen, felt, and heard. And similarly, in the workplace, I know I want to be seen, felt, and heard. And so I'm doing my job to walk the walk, to make sure that we're implementing things here, to make our employees know that they do matter. And then we want to strengthen relationships throughout the organization. Again, because that life cycle, that employee life cycle, that talent life cycle is very, very important. We want to keep a continuous circle. We don't want any breaks. And if we do have breaks, we want to have a culture of psychological safety, like our panelist Rick shared, where it's safe to share and they don't have to fear reprisal from speaking up, even when their thoughts may be different, and that they can think differently and we can agree to disagree, but always leaving out the disrespect. And so here in LA County, one of the things that I love, and I talked about it earlier to our organizers, is that December 1st, LA County Board of Supervisors have adopted a countywide Indigenous land acknowledgement. And so that's something, even though it's not in the slides, maybe your organization, maybe your diversity council, maybe want to look into a land acknowledgement, acknowledging the land where your organization or agency sits. And that can be part of the healing that takes place, because we know that our country has a whole lot of different things that are in conversation surrounding systemic racism, and our employees are hearing it, our employees are feeling it, and they're bringing those thoughts to the workplace. And so we want to let them know, you don't have to hide that. We can have safe conversations, and then we can take your suggestions and feedback and implement things to make it better. Thank you. Defining employee resource groups. So ERGs are voluntary. They can be referred to as affinity groups. They generally aim to provide support, enhance career development, and are a safe place to foster communication and connection and a sense of belonging. One of the things I really, really enjoy about our ERGs is that when we want to communicate up to our leadership, we use something called the SBAR template. It's a form. So instead of just saying we're getting together and we're complaining, we're getting together and we're discussing. And not only are we discussing, we're providing feedback to our leadership. The SBAR stands for situation. We're describing the situation that we're concerned about. The background, we've done our research to give insight, because maybe our leadership is new. Maybe they haven't been there a long time. And so we want to inform them about the background. We do an analysis. What is the impact of this particular situation on our employees, on our workforce? And then we give our recommendations. So it's not a complaint, because we're giving solutions and best practices and strategic suggestions for making it better. And we find that organizations that allow communication to flow top down, bottom up, diagonally, those are organizations that have better employee engagement, better workplace cultures, again, because the employees are seen, felt, and heard, and they don't have to bottle it up and suppress it. We have a mechanism to communicate to our leadership. Next slide. And so I just gave you here on this slide the process. And this can be the process for any tool that you use. Formalize, make the business case, look at your strategic plan, pull out the goals from the strategic plan to make the business case, customize it, get members, develop leadership, communicate, and assess outcomes. What we've done is an engagement survey. So the employee resource groups we have here, one centers around accessible thinking, that's different or disabilities employees in that group, military and veteran families, mindfulness, dealing with mental wellness, mental fitness, pride, our LGBTQ plus group, generations, dealing with the different generations. But this format, this process can be used for whatever tool that your organization chooses to implement. Next slide. Book talks and media club. So our ERGs exist, and we also have our book talks and our media club, and these are some of the titles that we've had an opportunity to read. Not only have we had an opportunity to read, some people don't have the capacity to read. I'm some people. I have 3 children and my brain cells are fried, but uh, some other people do. But we find titles that have movies to go with them, and then we invite the authors to come and to share with us, and we have respectful communications to share out what's going on. And these are just opportunities for us to engage and to connect and to see our similarities, and also to celebrate and acknowledge our differences. Because again, we want to make sure that we're seen, felt, and heard. Next slide. As I wrap up, I want to talk about providing strong and visible leadership. I talked about it earlier, but again, people need to know that they have permission to do the things that we're talking about. If leadership is not strong, visible, and giving, granting permission and empowering, it's very challenging for people to, again, feel safe. We have to communicate, demonstrate, and collaborate. What do I mean? We want to make sure that we are bringing people in, that we're communicating through storytelling, emails, short videos, understanding that all of our employees learn differently. They receive information differently. Some groups are going to want an email, some groups are going to want a video, some groups are going to want an article. Everybody's going to want something different. So it would do all of our organizations well to come up with an effective communication strategy. We also want to show our team that we're engaged. What do we mean? Be present during your meetings. We got to quit multitasking during meetings. Give eye contact, nod, give those micro affirmations. We know we got micro insults, we got micro assaults, we got all kind of stuff going on, but we want to give micro affirmations by nodding and gestures to let our employees know that we see you. Let our employees know that we understand when we are having a conversation with them in those coaching moments. What I heard you say is, Olive, or Rick, what I heard you say is that correct? That demonstrates that we understand their perspective and that we give them an opportunity to clarify, so we're not assuming if we misunderstood something that they said. We want to avoid blaming to build trust. Sometimes when things go crazy, we just go ahead and blame. But instead of saying that, as we manage and lead our diverse teams, we can bring our teams together by saying, all right, team, that flew apart, that fell apart. How can we make sure it goes smoothly next time? We turn the responsibility into a group effort instead of singling out people for an individual mistake. So we're not shaming, we're leading and rebounding from challenges with grace. We nip negativity in the bud. Negativity and COVID have two things in common. They both contagious. And so we want to nip it in the bud. If you got folks that are operating negatively, let them know on this team, that's not how we work. But we do give one another the courtesy of a conversation, so we don't have to harbor it, we don't have to suppress it, and we can continue to connect, to remain engaged, because we are not going to get anything accomplished unless we get it accomplished together. Finally, we want to include our teams in our decision making. When making decisions, collaborate with your team to find ways to bring their voices, their ideas, and differences to the table together. And if we are senior leaders, listen to me, being inclusive and transparent is even more critical, because again, leadership, top leadership, senior leadership behavior will dominate the workplace culture. And so we want to make sure that we're giving the reason why, giving the why when we can, because growing up in my house, it was you do as I say. That does not work in today's workplace, because people need and deserve to know why. We made this decision and these are the reasons why. Employees may not agree, but they can at least respect that we were transparent with them. Um, Finally, appreciate and recognize your staff. If you want to manage and lead an effective group of a culturally diverse workforce, appreciate and recognize them. What do I mean? In conversations and meetings, uplift their ideas, uplift things that they're doing, speak good of them, be a champion for your team. The more you do that, the more effective you will be, and the more psychologically safe our teams will feel with us. Speak good about them in their face and talk about them good behind their back. I encourage that in our organization and in yours too. If it feels good, if it feels right. But I never had anybody come back and say, Shawna, I heard that you lifted up an idea. I heard that you spoke positively about something that I did. And no one has ever come back and complained about it. But they said, I heard what you said about me, and it made me feel really, really good. And those are the types of interactions that we want to have to continue to build our teams, lift our teams, engage our teams, improve our workplace culture. And again, these are just practical tools that you can implement in the workplace, maybe in your personal life or other organizations as well. But these are tools that I've used that have been effective for me. Very last slide. These are resources that I found for you. They are all excellent. The one that I really want to encourage you to go and check out is implementing the very last one, all of them, of course, but implementing a coaching culture requires truth and courage. If you choose one that you want to read from my area of the slide deck, I would encourage you to start there. I was extremely encouraged, and it shared some of the things that I do in my leadership here in the county of Los Angeles. And if we go to the next slide, we will entertain questions if we have any, Miss Natasha.
Oh, we absolutely do have questions. Thank you so much for such an enthusiastic and energetic presentation. I believe the first question that we have is a two-parter, which says, how do you encourage managers and leaders to create a safe space for their teams? And what is the importance of having a safe space?
I encourage managers, well, first I model it. If you sit in a meeting with me, you've been with me for a few minutes, I model it. I model being positive. I model lifting up. I model letting people see me. I talk about my failures. I talk about a time where I was not as emotionally mature as I am now, where I blew it in a meeting. And it was by grace that the lady I blew it with looked past my failure and chose to promote me, and then pulled me to the side and said, you are passionate, you are enthusiastic, and you remind me a lot of myself early in my career. And I share that story, and it makes people feel safe that they can show me them because I've showed them me. And so I'll show you who I am now. I'll show you who I was then. I'll let you know what I did to grow. And if it feels good and if it feels right, I encourage you to do the same, because again, I am trying to build a team, and I don't want my team to think I'm perfect because I blew it back then, and because I am human, I'm going to blow it again. But I am trying, I am growing, and people, what's from the heart reaches the heart. People recognize the real. And if you fake and acting like you have it all together, people can see right through that. And so at the end of it, it's about respect, it's about transparency, it's about being vulnerable, and it's about sharing those growing moments with the coaching mentality. Rick talked about being an athlete. That coaching mentality is so poignant, and that's why I refer to that particular resource.
Okay, thank you for that. And then our second question says, what is your advice for those currently in leadership positions who do not feel empowered to move forward with creating and or enhancing a DEI culture?
That can, well, we got to find out, not feeling empowered is the fruit, but why is the root, right? And so I would encourage you to do some searching and to do some talking and to get really to the bottom of it. What is it? Is there a low trust environment? Are you a lone voice in the wilderness there? Is leadership not on board? Have the benefits been shared with leadership of what engaged employees mean for goals and outcomes and performance metrics? Because if the goal is for the agency organization to perform, the data that is connected to engagement that Rick showed us shows engaged employees have better outcomes. And so we've got to find out, why aren't you empowered? And then when we get to that, whatever the reasoning is, then we have to show the benefits of engagement and bringing people into that space. And then being courageous to say, maybe I'm burnt out. Maybe I tried it and it didn't work. And acknowledging, uh, this is not a journey. This is not, you're not going to ever arrive. As an equity practitioner, I'm not going to ever arrive at a place where I have it all together. This is an ongoing journey, and keeping that mindset, keeping my long game lenses on, not saying we did that last year and which it should be better. I know when I retire and leave this organization, there's still going to be more work to do, but I'm setting a foundation. I'm setting a standard for those who come up behind me to continue a better work culture, a better work environment for all that will come here to work and serve.
Awesome. Thank you so much for that. This has definitely been, I think, a very informative conversation, and that is a great coda on which we can, conclude this part of today's webinar. And I certainly would like to thank all of you, my colleagues here in the DEI space, for this amazing program today. And of course, we want to thank all of the nearly 400 people who joined us for this webinar this afternoon. We greatly appreciate you spending the past 90 minutes with us to engage in this conversation. And we hope that we have provided you with some really good information that you can take back to your organization to further DEI initiatives and the DEI conversation. So thank you all for joining all of us here in this space this afternoon for this conversation.